It's the secret network that is the foundation of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Shady ships are sailing all over the world, shipping illicit oil to buyers and funneling money back into the war machine. It's Russia's most valuable weapon, but France just showed the entire world how to dismantle that weapon, and it did it without firing a single shot. Deep in the Atlantic, France just did something so big that it's left Putin seething. A Shadow Fleet tanker is done. France became the hunter that Ukraine always needed it to be, and if President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has his way, this will just be the start of something bigger. It all started on the morning of May 31st. During the early hours of the day, a ship named the Tagor made its way through international waters. At a glance, the Tagor would seem similar to any other tanker. It wasn't. Digging below the ship's murky surface reveals that it's one of many that are a part of the Shadow Fleet, a network of Russian ships that sail under the flags of other nations to take Russian oil to other countries. That's precisely what the Tagor was doing. The ship sailed under the Cameroonian flag as it continued its journey toward the city of Limbe, which is also in Cameroon. Again, nothing seems to be wrong with that. But the Tagor doesn't belong to Cameroon. It's linked to Mohammed Hossein Shamkhani, who is a petroleum shipping magnate, and it's been suspected of carrying both Russian and Iranian oil to help the regimes in both countries to skirt sanctions. Shamkhani also happens to be the son of Ali Shamkhani, who was an advisor to the former Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, before he met his end when he came face to face with a bunker-busting bomb during the first 24 hours of Operation Epic Fury in Iran. The Tagor isn't a regular oil tanker. It's a ship that needed to be taken out of commission as soon as possible. As the Tagor sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, its crew must have thought that it had managed to pull off another fast one. Then it happened. Or more accurately, France happened. A French ship approached, and the Tagor's game was rumbled. French sailors boarded the vessel, arrested the captain, and took the vessel into custody. But that doesn't tell the full story. The details of the operation are mostly being kept under wraps, however there are bits and pieces of information that are starting to emerge. According to the Kyiv Post, we now know more than just the Tagor's destination. We know where it came from. The vessel was sailing from the northwestern Russian city of Murmansk, which immediately signifies that it wasn't a Cameroonian vessel despite where it was heading. This ship was carrying illicit cargo from Russia. The French Atlantic Maritime Prefecture has also revealed that the interception of the ship took place deep into international waters, over 400 nautical miles west of the coast of the French peninsula of Brittany. Russia's shady ship had 23 crew members at the time the vessel was captured, and they didn't respond to the orders that were given by the French crew that would eventually detain them. That's standard practice for a Shadow Fleet vessel. If you're caught, keep quiet. Putin doesn't need anybody blabbing about Russia's secret oil shipments. So that's what we know about France's role in this capture, but there's a little more to the story. None of this would have been possible if France hadn't taken some inspiration from the Beatles and gotten by with a little help from its friends. Specifically, another nation that has been a thorn in Putin's side since he launched his Ukraine invasion offered a hand to France in this operation, or should we say a helicopter. The BBC reports that the UK's Ministry of Defence has confirmed that it provided a chopper to help France capture the Tagor. Again, details are thin on the ground. We know that no shots were fired in the seizure of the ship. All that the UK has revealed is that the chopper was previously aboard the HMS Somerset, and it was involved in tracking and monitoring in support of the French operation. That makes sense. A helicopter can hover over a Shadow Fleet vessel for hours, constantly communicating its position to incoming ships that wish to detain the offending boat. That's likely what happened on May 31st. The UK tracked, and France took it down. As you'll soon find out, France is getting pretty efficient at sticking it to Russia's Shadow Fleet, and it had to be when it came to the Tagor, as the ship is a constant offender. France has known about it for years, so have many other nations. According to Euromaidan Press, the vessel has been under sanctions from the US, Ukraine, the UK, Switzerland, and the European Union for a long time, and it's among the many ships that Ukraine's military intelligence lists as being part of the Shadow Fleet. It's also sailed under the flag of Guinea before, which is another shot at any claim that Russia might make that it's a Cameroonian vessel. The Tagor has also sailed to many countries, often travelling from Russia's Baltic ports to places as varied as Thailand, India, Vietnam, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The Tagor was an important ship for Russia. Now it's gone, and Russia is raging. Putin's favourite mouthpiece, Dmitry Peskov, has already had plenty to say about what France did on May 31st. "We consider these acts illegal. They border on international piracy," Peskov declared before making vague claims that Russia is taking measures to ensure the safety of its cargo. Ooh, Dmitry, you just gave the game away. Remember, this is a Shadow Fleet tanker. It's supposed to be Cameroonian. You can't just come out and say that the cargo on board is Russian unless you want people to know that everything about this ship and its sailing is illegal. French President Emmanuel Macron had the perfect response to Peskov's ranting in a June 1st post on X. It is unacceptable for ships to circumvent international sanctions, violate the laws of the sea, and fund the war that Russia has been waging against Ukraine for more than 4 years, Macron said, adding, "These vessels, which fail to adhere to the most basic rules of maritime navigation, also pose a threat to the environment and to everyone's safety. Your move, Russia." It will be interesting to see what Russia is going to do to ensure the safety of its cargo, now that the cargo is in France's possession. So far, all that Russia has done is request information about the makeup of the crew that took the Tagor into custody, while moaning about how it hasn't been notified about any of the actions that France has taken against the ship. That's hardly the sort of powerful response that Peskov implies is coming, but then that's typical of Russian threats against NATO nations: far too much bark and very little bite. Besides, if Russia wants to get some hints about what lies in store for the Tagor and its crew, it doesn't need to search too much. We told you earlier that France is getting pretty efficient with dealing with Shadow Fleet tankers. That claim hasn't been pulled out of thin air. France has a growing track record of this kind of thing that tells Russia all that it needs to know about the fate of its illicit ship and its crew. But before we get deeper into that, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. Are you enjoying this video? Great. Remember to subscribe to the channel as we publish videos like this every single day. Since September 2025, France has carried out similar boarding operations against 3 other Shadow Fleet tankers besides the Tagor. First, there was the Borochai, which France boarded in September. That ship was sailing under the flag of Benin, which is a relatively small West African nation. As for the ship's captain, he was Chinese. Something doesn't add up there. However, the fate of that captain, who Politico named as Jiangji Chen in a March 30th piece, reveals what may now lie in store for whoever was at the helm of the Tagor. In March, French courts convicted Chen of failing to comply with French authorities after special forces from the country boarded his ship as it sailed off the waters of Saint-Nazaire. The Borochai was carrying about $100 million of Russian oil at the time, and also had a pair of Russian citizens on board who Chen would only identify as security agents. Chen was sentenced to a year in jail and a fine of around $175,000 for his crime, though the sentence was passed in absentia. Still, if Peskov and the Russian embassy want to know more about what lies in store for the Tagor and its crew, this sentence offers a pretty solid indication. The capture of the Borochai seemed to light a fire under France. A few months later, in January, France was at it again. This time the target was a sailing rotter and king of sinful sots named the Grinch. Another Shadow Fleet ship that was subject to international sanctions, the Grinch was being sailed by an Indian captain, and he was travelling through the Mediterranean Sea from the same Murmansk port from which the Tagor was sailing. This time the Russian vessel was sailing under the Comoros Islands flag. It ended up moored and under guard at a French port close to the city of Marseille. It appears the Grinch may have been released by France after its owner paid a multi-million-dollar fine. At least that's what the Moscow Times suggests, as it claims that February saw France release a suspected Shadow Fleet ship that wasn't the Borochai. Another of Russia's shady ships bit the dust in March. This time it was a vessel named the Dana, which was sailing out of, you guessed it, Murmansk, this time under the flag of Mozambique. You're probably starting to see a few patterns here, especially in terms of the ports that Russia uses and the exploitation of African nations to try to keep its Shadow Fleet sailing under the radar. The trickery didn't work for the Dana. It ended up suffering the same fate as the 2 that came before and the one that France boarded on May 31st. France has an interesting hit rate going on here. In 2026, the country has taken a Shadow Fleet tanker into custody once every 2 months. If Zelenskyy has his way, France, along with other Western nations that have sanctioned so many of Russia's shady ships, will start upping those numbers sooner rather than later. We'll come back to that in a minute. Returning to the Tagor, the importance of the seizure of this latest Shadow Fleet ship is better understood when you know just why this fleet is so important to Russia. Ever since Putin invaded Ukraine, Putin has been building a massive network of tankers that exist solely to allow Russia to evade the sanctions that have been implemented by Ukraine's allies. These aren't top-of-the-line ships. The criteria for a vessel that makes it into the Shadow Fleet appear to be that it can still sail and that it's as cheap as possible. Piffling concerns related to safety, insurance, and the prospect of tankers that are, in many cases, years past their sell-by date are secondary. The BBC says that the average age of a Shadow Fleet tanker is around 20 years and that most are poorly maintained due to not having been used for years before they were sold to Russia. So that's what Russia is saying. Rust buckets tasked with transporting millions of dollars of oil. Floating environmental disasters that are just waiting to happen. Putin doesn't care about the quality of the ships, only that they can carry oil and, by hook or by crook, can get to countries that will buy the oil. Those two jobs are the reasons why Russia has invested billions into building its secret network of shady ships. Exact numbers are difficult to gather, which is the entire point. Russia wants the world to know as little as possible about these vessels. In December 2025, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, estimated that the Shadow Fleet encompasses up to 435 tankers, with that number growing to 591 ships when accounting for support ships. CSIS also estimated that Putin's nasty naval network transports around 3.7 million barrels of oil daily, accounting for 65% of Russia's seaborne oil trade, and that it generates up to $100 billion per year in revenue. It's that last part that matters so much to Putin. As long as the Shadow Fleet sails, tainted oil money flows into Russia that the Kremlin can tax to boost its war coffers. As massive as these CSIS numbers are, others claim that they just scratch the surface of the true scale of the Shadow Fleet. In a November 2025 report, Maritime News claimed that Russia's fleet is actually 3,240 vessels large. If true, that means the Shadow Fleet is over 6 times bigger than CSIS estimates. The Kyiv Independent built on this, noting that the fleet is supposedly transporting 337 million barrels per month, which amounts to a little over 11.2 million barrels per day. Again, that's a long way above the CSIS estimate, and it would presumably mean the oil revenue that Russia generates from its network of ships is in the hundreds of billions of dollars annually, rather than topping out at 100 billion. Whichever set of numbers most closely reflects reality is immaterial. The key point to understand here is that Putin needs the Shadow Fleet. Without it, the oil lifeline that keeps his invasion of Ukraine funded dries up, which means no more enormous pay packages for volunteer soldiers and even less equipment on the front. Still, when we're talking about numbers of this size, France seizing one Shadow Fleet tanker, no matter how important that tanker is, seems like small potatoes. You could look at it that way for sure, but the bigger story here lies in the aftermath. What France has done with this seizure, and those that came before, is show Russia that it isn't playing around with the Shadow Fleet. If France finds a shady tanker, it will do what it can to capture it. The knock-on effect is that routes that Russia thought were safe can no longer be sailed. Captains who are willing to take the payoff when the enforcement of sanctions was weak enough to make the juice worth the squeeze will think twice about sailing when they know a trip to a French prison may lie in their future. It's all about increasing the cost of keeping the Shadow Fleet running, be that by making Russia's decrepit tankers sail longer and more dangerous routes, or by ensuring that fewer sailors are willing to step on board the ships in the first place. The more risk that is created, the bigger the bites being taken out of the revenue that the Shadow Fleet generates. Still, a lot more can be done, and that's the message that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy delivered in the aftermath of the Tagor's capture. Zelenskyy spoke about the capture during his June 1st evening address to Ukraine's people, stating, "There has been another interception of a Russian tanker. Thank you, France. It's important that Europe takes a strong step and modernizes its legislation so that such tankers can not only be stopped, but also seized." Ukraine appreciates the hard work. But Zelenskyy is right. The response to Russia's Shadow Fleet needs to be stepped up if it's going to put a serious dent into Putin's ability to use his secretive network to skirt sanctions. New legislation will help. Russia would complain about it, but what else is new? And it's not like Russia has a leg to stand on when it comes to passing legislation that gives itself permission to harm other countries. It was only in mid-May that the Russian State Duma approved a law that allows Putin to invade any country to protect Russian citizens abroad. The language in this law is broad enough to basically give Putin carte blanche to use the Russian armed forces against any nation that even so much as arrests a Russian citizen. In the face of that, Zelenskyy calls for Western nations to pass laws allowing them to confiscate Russian cargo and tankers completely makes sense. In the face of that, Zelensky's calls for Western nations to pass laws allowing them to confiscate Russian cargo and tankers completely makes sense. It would be an escalation, but it would also be a move that sends a definitive message to Putin that he no longer gets to have things go his way with his sanctions-skirting Shadow Fleet. For Ukraine, France's latest seizure should be a stepping stone to greater things rather than a high point of the sanctions campaign. And if the West steps up and gets even more serious, Putin will be in real trouble. Ukraine is already doing everything that it can to stop the flow of illicit oil out of Russia with its flying sanctions. CNN reports that the period between January and May has seen Ukraine attack 15 of Russia's oil refineries with long-range drones, knocking out 40% of the country's refining capacity in the process. Those strikes are being accompanied by attacks on Russian oil terminals, with the clear intention being to stop Shadow Fleet vessels from loading up and shipping out. All of the ingredients of a Shadow Fleet crushing strategy are available. Ukraine is hitting Russian oil at its source, and its strikes are decreasing the use of the ports that those ships rely on to load their oil. France has just shown us what the next step should be: more enforcement on the sea. While Ukraine hits the source, the West should tackle the ships that manage to make it out of Russia. Putin's supposedly unstoppable network of shady ships will be halted, and as for Russia's oil lifeline, it will be choked off, crippling the Russian army in the process. France just laid down the blueprint for the rest of the West, and it did it without firing a single shot. Ukraine is tackling the Shadow Fleet too, only it takes a more direct approach. As France seizes, Ukraine strikes Russia's secret tankers, and now Ukraine's reach has expanded as far as the Mediterranean. Secret bases in Libya and covert operations in international waters are part of Ukraine's new approach to dealing with the Shadow Fleet, and you can find out all about both by watching our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you are subscribed to The Military Show to see more of our coverage of the West's attempts to aid Ukraine in taking down Putin once and for all. And thanks for watching.